Hi, I'm Mickelle Weber, founder and auteur of House of Peregrine. Expat, immigrant, pioneer, none of these were a fit, but Peregrine describes what we are all about perfectly. Those that craft their life story with intention. I've spent the last 6 years in awe of the life-changing connections and stories I have experienced while living abroad, and believe it is time for this adventure to be recognized, celebrated, and elevated to the life stage that it is. Through these interviews, I hope to connect those living internationally more deeply to both the place they are living and with themselves and those around them. We cover everything from international finances and meaning-making to global parenting and relationships to make your time abroad more intentional, edifying, and full of beauty. Find us at houseofperegrine.com, where you can find more ways to connect with the ethos of Peregrine. I hope you enjoy today's guest. Let's get started. Welcome back to the House of Peregrine podcast. I'm your host, Mickelle Weber, and today I'm speaking with Karina Lagarrigue, a returning guest who is a psychologist and elite performance coach and PhD candidate with over 15 years of experience supporting people whose lives play out under pressure, publicly, professionally, and personally abroad. In her practice, Karina works with creatives, diplomats, public figures, and high-achieving individuals navigating the emotional complexities of international life, career transitions, and cultural dislocation. Her approach is both discreet and deeply informed, grounded in trauma awareness, cultural sensitivity, and an understanding of what it means to carry emotional burdens that aren't always visible on the outside, but still take their toll. Thank you so much for joining us today. Feel free to like and subscribe wherever you listen. It helps us out a bunch. Even leave a comment. We read each one. Thank you so much for joining us today, Karina. Such a pleasure to have you back. I am so excited to talk to you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Mickelle. It's a very big pleasure for me to be part of your podcast and to help the community that you serve so well with your content.
Great. Well, I listed off all of your many credentials, and so I want to kind of jump in. If people want to listen to how you got started and all that, it's a great story. They can go to the podcast we did previously. We'll put it in below in the show notes. But today I wanted to bring you back on because you're speaking at the forefront of things that are very relevant for the international community, of course, but your expertise overlaps in a very interesting way. And so I want to start with your PhD that you are a candidate for, that you were just finishing up. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's just finishing up.
So I think something that makes us expert is actually our own experiences, right? And I think there is no better university than the University of Life. And although I'm always very cautious with people that just help other people without credentials, without kind of a proper training, there is something that comes with life experiences that is kind of inexplicable in the theoretical way. You have to experience it. And my thesis came after my own experience of being an adult TCK. So I'm sure that your community is familiar with what a TCK is, and expecting to be fine with relocation as a mother, and realizing how being a mother was a completely different story. Like
Yeah.
relocating, being a mother was completely different. But on top of that, something that I had very recently learned is that I am highly sensitive. And it's something that unfortunately is not taught in universities enough. We are trying to have some programs starting in London, starting in California, where sensory processing sensitivity will be part of the curriculum that is taught to psychologists, mental health providers, doctors, and also educators. But I hadn't been uh, taught about that. So I didn't know that I was highly sensitive. I just felt that my experience was different from other mothers.
Yeah.
And nobody had explained me that. And of course, I had my own kind of feeling inaccurate with all this being a TCK that was meant to be very adaptable, and then at the same time feeling weird and maybe not adapting as well as other people that were not TCKs necessarily. I was like,
Yeah.
what's going on? It's like there is
Yeah.
something here that is not right. It's like, why? Why is it so different for me?
Yeah.
And this is how my relocation to Ireland, 10 days postpartum with my second child, with a 27 7 months older son, well, initiated a very difficult personal process that turned out in being very interesting and important for the scientific population and community. So when I returned 11 months later, so with 2 international relocation in 11 month postpartum, I just brought this to the attention of one of my university teachers here in Barcelona. And she said, you need to do a PhD. You need to write down what is going on for these population, what's going on for those moms that, as yourself, may be highly sensitive due to sensory processing sensitivity or other neurodiversities, and they're not experiencing relocation in the same way. They're not transitioning into motherhood or experiencing motherhood in the same way. If we talk about all the sleep deprivation, the high demand, all this care that comes together with an infant, right? And this is how my journey started. And I'm very happy to say that our first article, that is a quantitative one, so based on data, on numbers that we know that especially my community likes very much, is hopefully going to be out by the end of the year.
Right. And what was the most surprising thing you found from it? Or was there something that was surprising to you?
In the results, you need to be aware that until the paper is not fully published, I'm not allowed to give many details, but I would say something that was comforting. And I think this is probably what I find as well in my clients when they come to me. It was the
Mhm.
confirmation of my intuition, the confirmation that no, it's not the same. It is just
Yeah.
not the same. And it's not the same quantitatively. We can see it that is not the same.
Yep.
We can see it even among highly sensitive people, like it is different also depending on how you are experiencing your motherhood. Expatriation does play a toll that many people kind of just don't see, and it
Yep.
is there. So I would say probably, yeah, the biggest finding in my research was that, yeah, I was not exaggerating, because I think many highly sensitive people just feel that they're exaggerating, and we're
Yep.
not.
Yep. And for you, is high sensitivity included in the neurodivergent like in the spectrum of neurodiversity? Is
To
that
this,
yeah,
yeah. But
yeah.
funny enough, when we talk about all these categorizing things, right, in the main research group that we have in Europe, led by Dr. Michael Clues, it's very sensitive, right? Because when neurodiversity, first of all, has a negative taken by the society, right? People don't like to be tagged as neurodivergent. They don't want to feel or just even treated differently. There
Yep.
is this push to be neurotypical as something good, right? As this is how everybody should be. And the more you look like that, the better. To the extent that I am having families that are obviously neurodivergent in a neurodiversity that is included in those spectrum, that is giftedness. But even that one is not kind of well taken as a neurodiversity. Like, I'm gifted, I'm not neurodivergent. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay. So,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
tricky. So
Yeah.
sensory processing sensitivity being an environmental sensitivity, being how your nervous system reacts to environmental stimuli, it's even more difficult because we don't live in a sensitive environment.
No.
Like, we live in environments that are very highly demanding, very filled with inputs that are quite intense. And highly sensitive people at this point, unless they adapt their lifestyle, are the ones that suffer from this trait the most.
Yeah.
So again, it falls again into this negative interpretation of a trait.
Yep.
So it is not officially tagged as neurodiversity, and I don't know if it ever will. But yes, you're right. This is how I see it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And I think I've heard you say, or maybe a study you've done, or correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's a higher incidence of neurodivergence in the international community. Do I have that correct?
So this is precisely where what you were telling before, right? Thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing the research that I'm doing in parallel to my research, which is to see the amount of sensory processing sensitivity that there is in this community that we work with, right? The expatriated one. What we see, and this was very interesting to see in the International Conference on Sensory Processing Sensitivity happening in London last May, is that when we look, they were looking at refugees, and they can have all the data on the sensitivityresearch.com website, where all the updates on research is there. And what they saw looking at children, at refugee children, is that, of course, we tend to see a higher percentage of sensitivity, but for one main reason that was discussed in the roundtable at the end, and I was very, very happy that they just frame it this way. The tools that we have at this moment to measure sensory processing sensitivity are self-reports. And if you take these tools into a very sensitive environment, such as being a refugee or being an expat, right? All of those negative items that will be part of this questionnaire, right, will be much more easily relatable to those people because of their survival mode activation status, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting to see how Karina Lagarrigue, one of the main researchers in this field, and even Dr. Michael Plews were saying that we need more objective measures to fully understand what we are claiming that is a different brain activation, because we have data on how sensory processing sensitivity impacts different areas, regions of your brain, and
Uh-huh.
have them much more activated. But we don't have that on a specific sample of people that are experiencing global mobility. And we don't have it in a comparable sample, being that they're not in a vulnerable space, if that makes sense. Because again, it is an environmental sensitivity. So if we don't control for environmental variables, we may have a biased result, if that makes
Yeah.
sense, right?
Okay. Yeah. And so I think that what I see is that you're intersecting a lot of different things that people, or maybe we haven't in the past considered or paid attention to. Mothers being one, and mothers are usually the ones that, well, historically, this is not so true anymore, but have been the supporting spouse in an international move. If we are talking about people who have been displaced or refugees, mothers would be in a different state. So it's safe to say, is it safe to say that we're now stacking difference and ways of living? So when someone arrives when someone arrives to a new country and they are maybe a mother and they've moved a couple of times, there's a lot of layers there that they're bringing to that new place, that are not being accounted for by companies, are not being accounted for by the countries they're arriving to. What do you want people to know about that? From both the side of of people maybe considering doing it, but also the side of people who are asking people to do this.
I think you bring up a very important point, and is that fortunately there are these two possible scenarios, right? The self-initiated one, the one
Mm.
that decide to do that,
Yep.
among the ones we still find many women, for instance, relocating for love, right? And then we have the one that institutions are relocating, institutions and projects as well, right? Because you were talking about also how I support some creative ones that will fall into the category of self-initiated because they are getting right to
Yep.
decide that they want to be in that movie, for instance, but still it's the company that is going to set the how and the where and
Yeah.
all this kind of landing space, right? So those two different categories take or bring in different kind of consequences for the spouses, because sometimes they will kind of be willing to do that because there is a project where they may be also getting a benefit from or whatever, but then some other times is all based on good faith, on love, on hope, on all these, well, let's do it. Let's go for it, right? This sense of adventure sometimes as well, right? We know that expats are much more open-minded. They have a trait of personality that are much more open-minded, right? They have this sense of curiosity much more developed. So all these scenarios sometimes make a little bit invisible what you were talking about, all these challenges, all these invisible layers of complexity that come with it. That, yes, sure, you're going for the project is great. Or, yes, sure, you're going for love, and the love seems to be a very good reason to move abroad and so on. But we don't think about all those other little details that have to do with more political states, like, as you were saying, what are your rights when you land in that country beyond the project? Beyond the project being the one that you're establishing with the company, and perhaps, I don't know, you're made redundant abroad and you're not thinking about the return tickets. Like, how is it if I'm made redundant, I don't know, in the Emirates?
Yep.
How is it if I am there, stuck with my family? Yes, great, they help me with the relocation, but what about the return? What about
Yep.
coming back? What about a person that relocates for love and builds up a family abroad and separate? What about then? What about their financial situation, but not only their financial situation, but their emotional situation?
Yep.
What is it going to be to, on top of it, not have any more family reunions because they are your exes? So you're not going to birthday parties anymore.
Yep.
You're not going to Christmas with your ex's family. So you have either to go by yourself back home for
Yep.
holiday, or have your children to go back home and then miss on some of the traditions that were in the place where they were developing. And we don't talk about that enough. We
Yeah.
don't talk about how it is to take the full picture into account for both the two of them, the couple, as I was saying, they might be both finding themselves redundant in a country where they're both expats and they don't have any return ticket, or
Yep.
when there is a separation of the two of them. And I think those are very complex situations that unfortunately are not spoken enough
Yep.
when considering moving abroad.
Yeah. I think the way I frame it is that you are lucky, but you're playing in new levels of vulnerability you've maybe never experienced or have thought of or have accounted for. And so we've done a lot this last season on the podcast to try and get people to think through that, to have new agreements, to use the wisdom of the collective to ask the right questions, because I don't think anyone sets out to not know these things, but it just happens. You're putting yourself in I like to call it like an exercise in vulnerability. It's like a trust fall, especially as a couple or as a family. And so that, or as an individual with a company, it's a big trust fall. And so treating it as such is wise, I think. And emotionally is actually, financially is one way to look at it, but then emotionally you are the ripple effects into your family are, again, there's a lot of strengths. There's a lot of great things going on, but we talked about this a bit previously, but I would love for you to give us a way. Are there ways to kind of minimize emotionally the potentially some of the more common pitfalls or damage that's done in families? Is there any wisdom you have there?
Absolutely. And I think every time more, I think companies are aware of what you're saying, the emotional toll that it takes to
Yeah.
relocate families, to relocate people. And unfortunately, I don't think they take it kind of early enough.
Yeah.
They're kind of still in the interventional part, is not something that they, I don't know, project.
Preventatively.
Yeah, just claim, hey, we are the kind of company that will support you from your home country to the no, they don't.
Yeah.
They'd say we have great services, but they're kind of hidden in the packages and you don't
Yeah.
exactly know what they are and you have to go and get it. So
Yep.
it's very sensitive. And I think there is this lack of awareness that we have more and more problems in mental health in adolescence and childhood. It's increasing crazily. And something that I am trying to bring to the awareness of the society in general is that, of course, like we are experiencing the challenges of relocation at all levels. Like there are many more people moving abroad, but there are many more people experiencing people coming from abroad as well and
That's
being
right.
impacted by those that are
Yep.
arriving and bringing on new culture habits or rituals, new outfits, new understanding of the culture, like all of those things are impacting us so much. And we're not having a guidance. There is no guidance in how educators should navigate. And I'll talk, of course, I have many more international students, right, in
Yep.
international schools. But unfortunately, it happens also in regular countryside schools where they will have
Yep.
immigrants coming and impacting all those areas and having a final impact on their emotional well-being.
Yep.
on the sense of belonging, on the sense of identity. I keep hearing how more and more teenagers are having these fluid identities. Of course.
Yep.
How wouldn't they?
Yep.
Like, TCKs are not the exception anymore.
Yep.
We are a growing community that we need to understand much better. But then next to those children, they're very high demanded and unstable parents.
Mhm.
No guidance either.
Yep.
No guidance to understand what I just talked to you about. Like, oh, my children are not fully Argentinians anymore because they're growing in Spain, or they are not fully Arabics anymore because I'm a diplomat and they've lived in 7 different countries where perhaps they had different inputs in religion, costume, cultures, etc. So all of those things are not even being educated to the parents, but on top of it, they're not giving the space for the parents to process it. Like,
Yep.
the first one that are in a very vulnerable place are those parents, because they are also in this survival mode, in these very high demanded job positions where they don't even have the time to understand what is going on for them,
Yep.
let alone for the couple, let
Yep.
alone their intimacy.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, I want to wrap this up really quick because I want to get to the next thing. I have to say, there are so many subjects that you are an expert on that I want to bring to our audience. So I wanted to say 2 things. The first is, this was my journey of coming up with House of Peregrine. Peregrine is that identity of not of being a mix of identities, just to make sense of it for myself and to bring awareness and advice and culture to this. And so whatever identity you find or make or create, do you think that's one way to inoculate, is to identify that you are turning into something else? Is that one way, an awareness you can have that might make things seem a little less lonely?
I do think that finding people that can name what you're going through helps a lot. We have a very good psychiatrist in Spain, Marian Rojas, and she says that understanding is the beginning of healing. Like, when you understand what you're going through, what you understand that there are other people going through what you're going through, that it is okay to feel how you feel. This is something that already starts the journey in a different way. Like, you don't have all these added layer. I always tell my clients how much kind of telling yourself that you shouldn't be feeling that is helping you.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't see the point.
You live in Europe. You live in you're making $1 million a year, whatever it is. You should feel lucky is
Excellent.
is something that we don't only hear from the outside, but we internalize on the inside. You're living your dream life. You get to move every 2 years, whatever it is. You didn't die in the war. Like, it's an incredible thing that, um, for me at least, the dark side of gratitude can be something that is, holds us back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The other day, I was listening to a latest research that was published on a TCK podcast, that she just interviewed many TCKs, right? And in the diplomat, precisely in the diplomat area, and they were talking about this burden of this assumed privilege and
Mhm.
what she called the feeling norms, right? All this, there are some feelings that are allowed, that you can feel, that
Yep.
you're entitled to express in a certain way, but there are others that don't belong to you. You don't have nor the permission to feel, let alone express it, and especially not in certain contexts, right?
Yep.
And this is a big toll that comes with this relocation, especially with the community that we are talking about, that I specialize with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's even just starting there, of being like, you're allowed to feel all you're feeling. I hear so many good tips coming from you that you can give to your kids, to you as a couple, and even to yourself if you're alone, is like, let yourself feel everything. Let yourself change. You're going to change. Let yourself be entitled to um, compensation for this beyond what you think you deserve. Be entitled to just, again, it's a big privilege, but also it's almost like Would you say, for me, it's a little bit like hazard. It's like a hazard. It's a dangerous thing to do, to move abroad. And so acknowledging that and giving yourself the credit for being brave and doing something that's kind of dangerous emotionally, financially, I think is wise. Um, and that it's helped me and my kids even to just be like, you know what? We're doing this because this is the life we want. That doesn't mean everything's easy. And that doesn't mean that there aren't certain points where you're going to feel lonely because not everyone in your class. Corona's a really good example. When everyone was going to their grandparents and we couldn't, the planes wouldn't go see our family. So unless we swam across the ocean, we couldn't see them. That's a unique experience. And I think people who are living abroad have basically a multitude of new experiences, or they're living a life that's alongside the people that are living there. And that doesn't mean we can't come together, but the freedom to express what you're going through, I think, is a really important one that I didn't give myself the first 5 or 6 years. I just thought, oh, I'm so lucky. I'm a guest here. I have no right to complain or feel sad. My kids just need to speak Dutch and not complain. And that didn't do anyone any favors. So it can exist that you're both lucky and it's hard, which sounds obvious, but I think it's one of those things that can inoculate and make things a little bit easier. The second thing I want to talk about before we wrap this portion up and we get into another big topic, which is therapy burnout. But before we leave this topic, I want to maybe give people an idea of what we spoke about before. How can we, if we know we're highly sensitive or neurodivergent, I've seen a lot of people actually realize they're neurodivergent after they've moved abroad because that's when they started hitting their limits. And so is there anything you want to say about that, or tips you want to give, or insights there? Because you do have a multitude of experience on this one too.
So I think one of the things that you're bringing up is that when we move abroad, right? You were addressing it as you have to give yourself permission to change, and now you just brought it into something different, which is many things that you have already always been, just will arise. And I think both are true. Like
Yeah.
you will change. There are certain things that are going to change. But when you move abroad, precisely because you're setting yourself to a situation, a context that is so at the edge of your abilities, there are many things that you are that will just become much more evident to you because they're just there in your system one, that they call it, right? You're activated and that's how you function. And this is now evident to you. There is no masking or social resources that will help you to navigate it. You are raw yourself, and there you go. Now go ahead and be yourself, right?
Yep.
So I think sometimes, as we were saying, it may be that neurodiversities in nowadays, especially what we are seeing, is that they're more and more trendy, so to say. It's like, and it is a combination of the lifestyle that we live. Okay, there is a lot of screens that are not helping at all. There is a lot of this fast-paced lifestyle that is not helping at all. And then, of course, many traits that are propers or more identified with neurodiversity, such as being much more sensitive to your environment, to sounds, to music, to all these things, become much more evident. But we also need to kind of test it in different environments and different life moments, right?
Yep.
And this is something that I'm bringing up in my mental health best practices guidelines, is that we need to be very careful when we diagnose, especially with this community, because the measures that we're using, they're standardized and they were not crafted on a highly mobile multicultural community. And the sample where we craft and we create those tests is very important to all these then numbers that you're going to give as a result of the test, right? So
Yep.
I think we need to perhaps start unlabeling things a little bit, and much more, as you were saying, just dignifying, accepting, and welcoming whatever you feel. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter the label. You don't need to have a label on neurodiversity specifically tagged at number XYZ to entitle yourself to feel that you're overwhelmed by your environment and that you need headphones when you go into crowds, or that you are sensitive to food, and that yes, you want to stop adapting to food changes every time you're relocated, and you want to have a more standardized diet that helps you to be less impacted by global mobility. Like, There are certain things that is super important to allow yourself to just be the way it is. And then I think that something that we are lacking, but especially if you're highly sensitive or you're neurodivergent, is time between transitions, meaning that we still pack our agendas with too many things to do too fast,
Yeah.
right? I'm new there. I need to do all this paperwork, get to meet all those people, get to do all these things by X because it will help me adapt. Well, perhaps not.
Yeah.
Perhaps it will actually delay your time of adaptation because you're going to be overwhelmed, you're going to be completely collapsed. And something that we know is that in order to be adapted and feel adapted in your body, you need to feel a brain desactivation, not
Mhm.
an overwhelmed brain. So, in order to do that, expanding the time of transition, and this is true for everybody. Something that our research said is that what is essential to a highly sensitive person is good for everyone.
Yeah.
It's just that the highly sensitive person will feel it much more intensively. But everybody would benefit from longer transition processes, diminishing your to-do list per day, having more time between actions that you take to breathe, to process, to acknowledge your body. Something that I see a lot in my client is that they tend to disconnect themselves from their bodies because their brain are going so fast that there is
Yeah.
kind of a, I don't have time for that. So because I don't have time for that, well, just put it on the side. And until we have a psychosomatic symptom, kind of saying, no, pushing through, saying, I am here and you need to listen to me, they wouldn't stop and listen. So most probably, if I had to say something, first of all, decrease the amount of things that you're going to set yourself to do when relocating and listen to your body. Take time to listen to your body.
Yeah. And said another way, I would say you are doing something just by existing. Put it on your to-do list if you have to. Existing in new country, 10 check boxes. Then put another 3 if you normally have 12 things you do in a day. Yeah, that's such good advice. But it's worthwhile to have a regulated nervous system to do any of these things.
Exactly.
So I want to move into burnout with therapy specifically. I love that you're talking about this and you're willing to talk about this, especially as a psychologist yourself and someone who sees clients who are couples and individuals. I
Yes,
think
I do.
this with this compound nature, especially as international people, I think, and if you have any neurodiversity and then any difference in culture with how men and women relate, or there's a soup of things that we go into. So people say all the time, just get help. It's not that easy. I share often until we found the person that helped my partner and I, we had to go through 5 or 6 different therapists, right? And that takes its toll. That can itself lead to a dissolution of a partnership. And so I don't know what entry point you want to go through, couples or neurodiversity or the combination or TCKs, but this is real. And so I want you to speak to it. When your clients come to you, describe therapy burnout for me, if you wouldn't mind.
So the first thing to acknowledge is that we're talking about, again, and we just mentioned it before, right? We're talking about a community that is feeling this assumed privilege.
Hmm.
And that's the first barrier.
Yep.
Like if I am in this privileged lifestyle environment, whatever, why should I need anybody to support me?
Yeah.
I've got everything. Like I'm much better than the ones I left behind, or I took this because I chose to, right? There is also this sense of guilt that I decided that for myself. How come am I going to go and complain about it?
Yep.
Right? And all of those layers, something that we see is that it just takes therapy to come in their lives later in life. And you were talking about all these different populations that I work with. Something that we know is that TCKs will take even longer. And I just gave you my example. I was like, how come am I struggling with relocation to Ireland if I'm a TCK, right? And I am just used to all the moving abroad and I should be just fine. On top of that, on top of having all these layers of barriers, on top of having all these barriers to reach out to therapists, they then encounter the difficulties to have a therapist that get it, that
Yeah.
understand what they're going through, that will actually validate what they are experiencing, the difficulties that they're going through, and giving them adapted tools to their lifestyle. Because I still remember myself when we went to a couple of therapists and her saying, "Well, just get the help of the grandparents." And I was like, "That's very Spanish style, but my parents are not here. So how are you intending me to reach out to them? Like, should I send them by plane? Do you know how much that costs?" Like, there was no understanding of the context. And actually, in their intake, there is all this lack of subtle questions that helps them to have the full context, right? They will
Yeah.
go through very generalized questions and they will forget a lot of them that have to do with the context, right?
Yeah.
And there is a lot of assumptions that, of course, because perhaps we have the money, then yes, just send them abroad. What's the problem? And it's like, well, maybe my parents are not in good shape to take care of the kids, or maybe the country where my parents live are. I don't know, is in war at this moment, like there is no awareness on all these other layers of complexity that are around the families.
Yeah.
So if you add that to the fact that sometimes, just like you and I, we may be using the same language, but not giving the same meaning to the words,
Yeah.
therapy becomes a very tricky place for patients to feel safe.
Yeah.
Unless the therapist, first of all, is aware of the impact of being an expat, of living abroad, and also about the possibility of being using the same language. Because I speak four, but I probably don't speak any of them to the level of any natives because I'm a TCK.
Yeah.
So my languages have been acquired in context and have a certain meaning to me that doesn't have the same for you as a native in this language, or for Spanish, for instance, or Catalan. This session in specific with my husband was in Catalan all the time because I am fluent in Catalan, but do I feel comfortable emotionally in Catalan? That was not a question I was asked.
Yeah.
I was just taken in as a Catalan speaker and the session went along in Catalan. So there is also all these difficulties that bring, as you were explaining yourself, couples and individuals to seek support, first of all, in a state of very high vulnerability, because they will
Mhm.
wait until they can't take it in anymore. And then
Yeah.
encountering therapies that kind of force them to compartmentalize their stories,
Yep.
to just use one part of the story because we identify they have the tools for that, but not for all the other ones. And
Yep.
then it becomes an added burden.
Yeah.
I am just this person that has this impossible life that my family don't get, that in the couple, my partner is not getting because although we're sharing the life, we're not sharing the experience, if that makes sense.
Yep.
We don't have the same experience. And on top of it, when we seek the help, I'm misunderstood.
Yeah. Which can add a lot of traumatic layers if you're not careful. And so maybe, and especially in couples therapy, it's really tricky because if it's not working for you, there's not, you have to get through that with your partner. Um, and in my experience, being accused of being too proud, being too difficult, not wanting to take ownership because I didn't feel safe, not being willing to let go of control. There was a lot of things that were hurled my way because I just simply was like, I know I can feel safe. I don't feel safe here. Not that they weren't great therapists or great for others, but the level of complexity we are all navigating really does need a special expertise. And so when I would say how I would describe burnout is you don't feel you're sick, let's say, and you have nowhere that can help you fix. And that is its own level of, it can just lead to burnout. So it's this extra radio layer that's going on every part of your life. And so it's in your parenting, it's in your marriage, it's in your work, it's in the grocery store, it's in the schoolyard. Every layer of like, I have nowhere, I am not doing well, but I have nowhere, no one who understands why. Even I don't understand why. I'm not even giving myself permission to feel like there should be a problem. And so this can get us into some deep trouble, I think, in our population
And I
and
think,
with this experience.
and this therapy burnout comes out of this, as you were saying, this trying to seek a solution, to look for somebody that gets it, that gives you those answers. And because you don't find them, that's where you end up in that situation you're just describing, this additional layer of vulnerability. Because even those that were meant to give me that safe space to be myself, to learn how to allow myself to accept those emotions, to let them in, to navigate them, they're not
Yeah.
doing it. So if they're not doing it, at some point you get a burnout of therapy. So one of my clients described it that way because they said, until I found you, I just thought that therapy was another place where I was being hurt, not heard, hurt.
Yeah. Yep.
So I didn't want therapy anymore. I was afraid of going back to therapy.
Yep.
That's what
And
I call therapy burnout.
yeah. Yeah. And it's a fine line between being challenged and being, but it starts with that safety and knowing what you're going through. Not what you're going through, but also the level of complexity. And so when your clients come to you, is that the most common thing you hear? Is that you have to get them in a place where they're accepting their experience?
That's one of the main things most of the time. They need to validate what they've gone through. I would say the first layer that we need to kind of detach a lot of time is money and resources. Like
Mm,
many of my client would just come and say, I know, I'm sorry, I'm bringing that, but it's really hurting me or it's really burdening me. Like having them to stop apologizing.
yeah. And is that,
Apologizing.
yeah, to back up. So is that because what I see a lot, and I think you mentioned in our previous conversation, was they are often highly paid
Yes,
or and so these are people that don't feel like they should have problems because they
exactly.
have enough money.
Exactly.
And so that is a very interesting place, coming from a place of privilege and apologizing for having problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Which
so they
would
think,
take us a lot of time to just normalize that you have the right to have problems. And let's let the financial numbers, because sometimes they even bring them up to session and say, let's let the financial aspect on the side. The fact that you're going to be paid 3 million for your project doesn't take away that you're scared, that you're stressed, that it is something that is going to impact your family and you're crazily thinking and rethinking whether you should or you shouldn't, how it's going to impact your children. It's completely valid to have all those thoughts beyond the money that you're going to be paid.
yep. And so that works on the other end too. You were just speaking to me about it's usually women, but you have a client that's a man who is now dealing with that change of identity that comes from being with their partner. And we've talked about that quite a bit on the podcast, but give us some of the complexity that people who are supporting someone who's moving go through because they're not working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something that it's even more intensified is that you're so lucky
Yeah.
because you get all this lifestyle for free. And you're going to have to say that we're quoting here, both
Yeah.
of us, all the time,
Yeah.
because it is not true. Like there is all this emotional toll that is not visible. And
Hmm.
then all this financial one that we say that if there is a separation is also not taken into account or even mentioned in the contract of the employer that is taking one of the partners, right? But
Yeah.
there is especially all this transition, right? And as we were saying, a lot of time is the women that goes through this transition. And for us, we know that turning into a mother is a huge change. I talk about it with this beautiful word from sociology that is matricence, right? We go through this matricence process. And a lot of the people that read what I publish say, When are you going to start talking about patrescence? When are you going to start talking about the man that is confronting all these social expectations to be the one earning the money, to be the one that is holding the pans in the family and that is doing all those stuff? And sometimes, depending on the culture this man is coming from, will be even more accentuated and will add layers of complexity in terms of guilt, in terms even of shame for doing
Mhm.
that. Shame on you. You're going to be and live with your wife and you're going to be paid by your wife and do housework. Come on. How is that man enough? Right. So
Yeah.
there is this layer of complexity that comes also on this end for men that will go into these transitions and take this role. And then on the side of the women, of course, we still live in a very unequal world where even when you move abroad and you try to get a job, you're going to be paid less. In some countries, these inequalities are even more unequal. And then, of course, there are all these social expectations of women to just do the work at home with the kids and everything because the baby needs the mother, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would have the same equipment to feed them. We
Yeah.
don't, right? So you
Yeah.
should be there. And one other thing that I have to work a lot with my clients is take this should away from their vocabulary. Like
Mhm.
there's nothing you don't want to do that you should be doing. Like,
Yeah.
let's look at what you want to do because even with global mobility, there is a lot of questioning what you feel is right because
Yeah.
you have all this cultural shock and things that will be brought into your awareness that perhaps you were very, very clear before that you would not breastfeed, but you just landed in this country where breastfeeding is like top, top, top. And if you don't, you have all this shame and guilt that will come from this environment. And
Yeah.
then you will be dealing with that from your environment. And then the questioning from your back home cultural family and friends saying, why are you even breastfeeding? And then being in this limbo space, not being understood from those back home and those in the country where you are, because you're questioning yourself in so many ways. And
Yeah.
the same happened for men in many other ways that are still very invisible.
Yeah. And I like to call it it's a little bit like a startup. You're flying the plane while you're creating it.
Yes.
You're doing that with your own culture inside yourself, inside your family, inside your marriage, if you're in one. And if you're dating, it's also complex. You're creating your own rules. And that's a lot of cognitive overhead. I always say it's like building a custom home instead of just moving into one. You're picking all the knobs and the handles and you're picking every single part of your life. And that it's a big job. It's worthwhile. It's very satisfying. In the end, you get something very beautiful, but that toll is not always seen.
Nor understood that it's different for each individual. We were just mentioning this difference between men and women,
Yep.
but among those men and women, there's so many individual ones. And we started talking about the neurodiversity toll that is going to be impacting that, but then
Yep.
also the how each of them is received in this new location, right? As we were saying,
Yep.
in some countries, women will be very much more, I don't know, like demanded by the place where they land because women have high expectation or men will have high expectation in that place. And then especially if they are being moved by companies or institutions, there is this that also adds a layer of different experiences because the normally the employer is going to be taking care of their employee and many times forget about the spouse, the children, and so on,
Yep.
especially on a kind of landing state, right? Like, what is it to land in a country where you don't understand what the person at the pharmacy is telling you, where you can't help your children with the homework because you don't understand the teacher, and how it is to just mainly just, I don't know, maybe subscribe to the gym, but have all this culture shock on how things are done and just being seen as you're this privileged person that doesn't have to work, right? So it's important to acknowledge that there are differences in both men and women, but then also within the experience individually and depending on how the context supports you.
Yeah. So I want to ask kind of a strange question because I think you can hang with it. once we've acknowledged this, once we accept it, once we account for it, is there a way to play with this? Is there a way, because in my work that I did over the last few years with talking about money and talking about how the economy doesn't acknowledge care work, and then within a couple, it's kind of a power dynamic that is, it's accepted. I have to say, the most interesting thing about my TED Talk is that I thought that I underestimated the amount of women who are the breadwinners in their family were very angry that I brought these things up because the power dynamic plays to their advantage. They're using it. It's part of their equation. And so I asked one woman, she was telling me, "Oh, I would never do these things to my spouse." He had moved to a new country for her job, stay-at-home parent. She said, "Your TED Talk isn't relevant for me because I would never do that to my spouse." And I said, "Oh, what if he had an affair?" She goes, "Oh yeah, I'd cut him out." And I was like, "So that would mean he had no visa, he would have no home, he would have no." And so there's this, and within countries, I think it's the same. There's this built-in power dynamic that is present and accepted and maybe even on purpose. Um, so is there a way we can transform that somehow? And I know that's kind of a big question. The way we do it often with an intimacy is like games, right? So this is why we have, so it's very erotic games, but in terms of immigration and having to learn a language, and is there, what is the transcendent next step after you've accepted, after you've acknowledged, after you've taken that on board? Is it just acknowledging it and laughing?
No, I think some of the things that I would say are more difficult for people, and I was just posting about that the other day, is that the first step is acknowledging,
Mhm.
and then is moving into what am I looking forward to building, right? What is it that, okay, so these are my challenges. Okay, so what do I want to leave? How do I want to leave those things? How do I want to navigate them? How do I want things to be for me? For instance, from a financial status, for instance, how do I secure myself financially when I move
Mhm.
abroad? And then it's like, and what am I ready to let go in order for that to happen?
Mhm.
Right? Because I think many people have all these big dreams at the beginning of a journey, like we're going to do it this way, and this is what we're going to gain, and that is it's like fantastic. This is what you want to get. Okay, well, in order to do that, you need to get rid of other things, which are what you were just mentioning, right? It's like, well, as long as we're together, everything is fine. But if you cheat on me, well, you're not a human anymore. You're not the father of my children anymore. You're that cheater that just got somebody that, yeah, you shouldn't have. And so that just takes you away of anything that is legit to any human being, especially a person that you shared intimacy with, that you build a life with, you have children with, right? Something very sensitive that I have a podcast, not a podcast, an Instagram live with Patricia Paper now that specializes in blended families,
Mhm.
is how difficult it is to navigate divorce and blended families when there is an ocean in between. And
Mhm.
how many times, especially with families, because I think that's what one of the things I specialize the most, right? There is this completely unawareness of the children. And you were
Mhm.
mentioning them before, and it's like how that impacts the children, right?
Yep.
Because if you divorce and you have no children, where it's going to be hard, and you're probably going to have to move back home or choose where you want to go. But when there are the children in between, that's not possible anymore. And as you were saying, there was all this care toll that you paid for many, many years that is not being compensated. There is this I am abroad because of those children as well that is not being taken into account either.
Yep.
So I think we need to design, and again, you and I are talking about what the ideal would be, and is we need to acknowledge, we need to decide, we need to have a plan, we need to have those important conversations that I think Rhoda did very good job in last session of Expat Couple Summit, where she was talking about those important conversations that need to happen before relocation and
Yep.
during relocation, as you also get to know what it is like. Because again, we're talking about each scenario being very different, legally wise, financially wise, and so on. And setting these kind of agreements up front, and understanding that in order for that to become what you go through, you have to let go on some other things, such as you were saying, this power dynamic. Am I ready to stop having this dynamic where, because I am the main bread earner, I am entitled to XYZ? Are we ready to give up on those dynamics? Are
Yep.
we? Because if we are not ready to give up on those dynamics, then we're just building a dream, but not a
Yeah.
life.
But it's a dangerous dream. It's a dangerous dream for the other person. And so I guess the way I would frame what you're saying is what I think happens right now is people give up their safety for
Yeah.
the dream.
Yeah.
A- And I'm encouraging people to not give up their safety for the dream. They can have both safety and a dream. But I
Absolutely.
also think visas are set up this level of violence that I felt when the Netherlands changed their visa structure overnight. And suddenly, if you lose your job, like having a visa, first of all, is a new level of vulnerability.
Yes.
If you're dependent on someone who has a visa, that's another level of vulnerability. So you're in the country at the mercy of your partner's job, and then your partner still wanting you. That's another layer. And so what I guess at the heart of it, for me, it's a little bit of a violent system.
Yeah.
And so that's something that if you don't take personally and know it exists, it's a lot easier to plan for.
Yes.
And it's not your partner's fault, it's not their company's fault. It's kind of a violent system. So you're entering a new level of vulnerability, also fun and adventure and all the other stuff. But I think if you plan at the safety level, it also helps a lot with the rest. And
Absolutely.
that's emotional safety, financial safety. And so that for me is something I want people to understand is it's inherently, again, you have to be adventurous, but you don't have to give up your safety either with therapists or with your partner or financially.
At any point. And
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
say is this part also of when you talk about violence, something that we see as well is that there is a higher rate of violence among expats. And a lot of it is psychological violence, right? And
Yeah.
all this manipulation and dependency, financial dependency that has to do. But unfortunately, some of it is also physical abuse that happens due to this dependency. Like, how am I gonna dare to go to a psychologist if what I want to say is that I am being beaten at home, and he's the one that has to pay for the therapist who I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So all those things are adding layers also of vulnerability that are real.
Yeah.
Real, meaning that they're not only psychological or financial, but also physical. And the same happens with minors. We see that a lot of our population unfortunately experience a lot of sexual abuse in their developmental years. And it has to both to do a part with this lack of safety in terms of constantly changing social interactional norms. So when an abuser is part of their environment, it might be because they didn't quite understood what was going on because of these cultural differences and how the child was not instructed in how to perhaps say no. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter whether it's a new country, if it's a no for you, it's a no everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And then there is also, unfortunately, the violence that most of the time happens within the family, because unfortunately, only 20% of the cases is somebody from the close environment not being directly blood related, and only 10% is violent, meaning that 90% of the time is very subtle, is very built upon the years. And if you think about relocation, that brings an additional layer of complexity because your parents are the only one that remain stable.
Mhm.
They are the only one that are with you all along. So
Yeah.
how dare are you gonna go ahead in a foreign country where you know nobody, where you have no system, where you don't even know what are your rights, and say that your partner is abusing on your child or that your father is abusing on yourself? It's very complex.
Yeah. So that's another layer of you really are your family is everything, especially for kids. Like they are your only ones. Yeah.
They're the only one that remains stable. So it becomes this dependency, this emotional dependency that adds a layer of complexity and vulnerability to the unit.
Yep. So would you say that for me, this is like, how does anyone make it through this? How does, and make it through, you're not going to make it through unchanged, but what are the questions you would ask yourself if you were in a couple or a family constellation to maybe test if you're strong enough to do this? To, if you have the choice and you want to keep reasonably safe financially, emotionally, are there, I mean, they always say green flags, or are there advice you would give to be able to check? Because until you're in it, you don't really know. They say you don't know a person until you see them with their parents or something. I would say there's another layer of that. You don't really know a person until you've lived abroad with them. There's another, like you said, things that emerge that have always been there that maybe would have stayed latent. And good things too, good things, amazing things. But there's also these other less the more tricky things. And so are there ways, things you can ask, ways of preparing?
So the first thing I would say is that not necessarily each relocation is the same as we were saying for a person, because you're thinking about the two of them moving abroad. So the two
Yeah.
of them being like in your country, my country, or Switzerland, right? So going to Switzerland. But in some scenarios, many couples, as I was saying, would move to one of the partner's country,
Yeah.
right? And when I say one of the partner's country, I can also say one of the side's companies or institutions, right?
Yeah.
I am moving to my husband's diplomat institution. And
Hmm.
this is the institution that is going to kind of frame what is going to happen for both of us and for me, right?
Yep.
I think there is a part, unfortunately, I don't work with sided responsibility in terms of, hey, you're the diplomat, so you're the one moving them abroad, so you are the one responsible for. I work on a 50-50 responsibility. Like, you are responsible for what is happening to your family as much as you are as well. Like, if you want to move into this diplomat life, just get informed. Like, get the information yourself, be the one that is self-informed of how things are going to go for you in any possible scenario.
Hmm.
Get the easy information. Don't rely on the other one that he'll know. Like, he's the expert, so I can ask him, because that's where all the manipulation on the information is much more accessible, because it's like, well, you don't understand anything, so I can tell you whatever I please. And I can tell you the story the way I want you to hear it. And you will just be additionally even more vulnerable, right? So I think there is this beginning of the journey, starting with individual responsibility. And unfortunately, as you were saying, and we have been saying along, right, people are just going into the journey. That's going to be fun. And that's it. And they don't look into the long term. They don't look into how is it going to be for me? How is it going to be for you? And this is why when I work with couples, the first thing that I do is individual assessment. Individual assessment that gets me to understand how each of them work. How are
Hmm.
each of them going to confront the next experience? How is it going to be for them, given
Hmm.
their own trajectory, personality trait, how they do things, right?
Yep.
And that gives me already a sense of, okay, well, this is going to be challenging for you, because if you don't make any decision, for instance, in your life, I have a couple that is like that. They're now moving from Spain to Belgium, but he is in Belgium and he's been in Belgium for longer, right? And she's the one that is expatriating for the first time, right?
Mm.
They're both Spanish, but he's been in Belgium for a while now. So he knows Belgium. And she's relocating because he has a job there, but she has
Yep.
to start from zero.
Yep.
So is a relationship that is led by him making the choices. They've been together for years. And all along, their relationship has been led by him making the choices and the decision. He's expressing that he's done with that, right? But when she starts putting on her little foot down, like, okay, then this is going to be how it's going to be in Belgium. And this is, he's not feeling comfortable
Yeah.
because it's a dynamic he's not used to,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
everything starts with, first of all, acknowledging, okay, we are in a certain dynamic that when we move abroad, this dynamic is not necessarily going to change. And in some circumstances, it's going to add vulnerability to the couple.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important to gain self-awareness and self-understanding before you initiate any journey. How do I work? Like, I didn't know I was so adaptable until I understood, oh, I'm a TCK. That's what I do. Oh, right. So that's why I gave in here and here and here and here and here. Oh, okay. Had I known that TCKs have this tendency to be hyper adaptable and just give in and just, yes, sure, I'll just be resilient, probably I wouldn't have given on so many things I had in the past. And
Yep.
of course, when I change, my relationship changes as well.
Yep.
There is a need for internal activation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I keep hearing a lot of resistance in the couples when I work with, like, but why should I be always the one initiating or presenting the problem or saying, like, well, are you interested in the change?
Yeah.
Because if you are interested in the change, then don't expect the other one to be the one activating it, because maybe he's not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's often that men don't want it to change. But what I've said, there's a really beautiful book by Mark Gaffney and others that have said, every crisis of a relationship is a deepening of intimacy, is an asking for a deepening of intimacy. And so that, I think if we trust that in our partners, they want to stay with you, but it has to change. That's
exactly.
a
It's
really
what
good.
we're saying. You know what
Yeah.
we're saying before? It's like you need to know what you want to gain,
Yep.
but then you have to agree and action what you're
Yep.
ready to let go.
Yep.
What are you ready to let go?
Yep. And that, don't let go of safety is what I want. I want people to know.
Absolutely.
Don't give
Absolutely.
up
At
safety.
every point, at no point you should feel more vulnerable, that, as we were saying, you will already be just by the fact of being an expert.
Yeah. But what I learned, I think, from this TED Talk experience is often that is what's happening, is people are giving up their safety,
Yes.
and that shapes things a certain way, shapes society a certain way, shapes the financial systems a certain way. So I think these conversations are always a little bit fraught because it's outside the norm. And so for me, starting with acknowledging that being what you're saying, this extra layer of being vulnerable is a really good framing to face it as a couple or as a family. So you're facing it together instead of fighting each other.
Exactly. But
And
it has
so,
to be clear from the start.
yeah, yeah, it's another interesting battle to start in the middle. But yeah, cool. Is there anything else? I want to be mindful of your time because we're closing up our time. Is there anything else about your next phase of research that you want to talk about? The postdoc, I think you said that you're working on. Is there anything you want to share with us on that further that we haven't talked about?
Well, I think the most important thing that I don't know if it's going to turn into a postdoc or not, but is this understanding that, well, we are like life is moving into a place where change is the only constant that we have, and therefore we need to, as you were saying, like, the world works the way it is working at this moment because we are supporting and sustaining dynamics and systems that are no longer the accurate ones and the right one for what is going on, for the world that we live in, right? So in order to stop supporting and just prolonging the challenges and the problems, we need to start activating changes in how we see things, how we name things, what we do with things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it, we have the data, we're still not activating it in real life. So I think the next steps on my end, at least, is to bring this awareness to big companies, big institutions that are mobilizing families. I think we need to activate some of the systems that they have, as I was saying, at the bottom of the list, but not up front, and putting them in a different position, such as you and I are saying, safety first, safety at work, safety in the relationship, safety in school, safety. Safety
Mm-hmm.
has to be there. And how to create safety is very complex, especially in a multicultural environment as we are all navigating, because for each person, safety looks in a different way, right? But it doesn't feel different, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we have that. We have that.
Yeah.
Can we help people feel safe? Can we create tools that help us really measure how safety people feel? Not R on a number because they have financial security, because, not on a number. How do they feel?
Yeah.
And from there, then we can start activating real change and move into something different. But I think at this point, we still don't understand. We are still not fully understanding the impact of global mobility on us as individuals that are globally mobile, but also on those that receive us and are impacted by us landing in their country, in their culture, and so on. And neither for the companies that are still spending billions of dollars, euros, you name the coin, in relocating families without giving them the safe frame, and therefore failing the person behind the job, which
Yep.
is the people I work with, the people.
Yeah, great. So beautifully said, and I'm so happy we got to touch on so many topics today. I love that you and I are able to hop around like that together. So many important things we covered. If people want to reach out to you either to participate in any research you have going on, because I know last time we spoke, I ended up doing your motherhood survey and sending it out to my community. But is there anything, what's the best way people can reach you if they either want to work with you or they want to follow what your research is up to? What's the best way?
I would say I'm very active, as you were mentioning before, on LinkedIn. I think that's one of the networks that I would say help me to reach out to most of the people that are in the positions to help me do the changes that I want to, right?
Yep.
Because I think there's still need, again, as we were saying, no, they're very brainy people and we need to move them into the body. So
Yeah.
bring their awareness on how everything is interconnected, and for them to reach out at the best performance, they need to be at the best state of mind. And that
Yep.
includes their emotions, right? So a lot of it is on LinkedIn. I do post some things on Instagram, but I'm finding it a little bit challenging. I might get a community manager or somebody to do that for me, but there are some things there too if you want something a little bit more kind of interactive. I am always happy to collaborate with podcasts. So there are different podcasters just like yourself that I've been invited to, and I'm touching on different topics that we have, maybe perhaps in a little bit more depth individually if you're interested. But then I'm a very approachable person, so you can always reach out to me by email, and if there is any way I can possibly help you, or I can perhaps even just help you to find the right person, I will be happy to do so. So just use my email, go to my website. My trainings for companies are going to be in a separate website, but attached to my website as well. So www.expatworldpsychology.com is where you can reach out to me directly, and you have my phone, WhatsApp, and everything.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I cannot wait. I'm sure you'll be back again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your wonderful questions, and especially for the reframing that I think make everything clearer to your community and the people that are listening to us.
Great. Thank you to all of you for listening to the podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this. It helps us a whole bunch. And join us next time on the House of Peregrine podcast. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed our show. For the latest insights on living internationally, join us at houseofperegrine.com to find out how you can connect with our community. Let's craft our life story with intention together.